The cameras rolled. The lights were bright. The audience, a packed house of daytime television fans, buzzed with anticipation. Nobody in that studio had any idea they were about to witness one of the most explosive talk show moments of the year. A verbal showdown between Steve Harvey, America's most beloved host, and Joy Behar, daytime TV's most outspoken provocateur. It began innocently enough. Steve Harvey, the king of charm, swagger, and quick wit, had arrived at ABC's studios in New York City that morning in high spirits. He was there to promote his new book on relationships and his upcoming comedy special, the kind of lighthearted appearance that should have been all laughs, smiles, and applause. The producers had briefed everyone, keep it fun, keep it friendly. This is Steve Harvey, after all. When Steve arrived, he was his usual self, joking with the production assistants, flashing that trademark smile, and turning even the makeup room into a mini comedy club. Everyone was relaxed. The studio energy was easy, the kind of feel-good morning atmosphere daytime TV was made for. But what no one knew, what no one could have known, was that Joy Behar had woken up that morning in a very different mood. Known for her sharp tongue and unfiltered opinions, Joy had a reputation for stirring the pot. But on that particular day, the pot wasn't just stirring, it was boiling. As Steve took his seat on stage, looking every bit the polished professional in his tailored navy blue suit, Whoopi Goldberg, serving as moderator, smiled warmly and turned to the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice filled with admiration, "please welcome the king of family television himself, Mr. Steve Harvey." The audience erupted in applause. Steve strode onto the stage with his signature confidence, waving to the crowd, laughing and even tossing out a quick joke before he sat down. The mood was light. It was supposed to stay that way. The first few minutes went as planned. Whoopi asked about Steve's new book, a heartfelt yet humorous look at love, family, and personal growth. Steve, in his classic storytelling style, had everyone in stitches describing how his wife runs the house like the Pentagon, and how raising kids had taught him patience he never thought he had. The audience loved it. They were leaning in, laughing, clapping, exactly what producers wanted. Then Joy Behar leaned forward in her chair. "So, Steve," she began, her tone deceptively casual, "you're giving all this relationship advice again. But let's be honest, how many marriages have you had now?" The audience laughed nervously. Steve's smile faltered for a split second. "3, he said evenly, maintaining composure. "And I got the last one right." A few people clapped. Whoopi tried to steer the conversation back to the book, but Joy wasn't done. "Right," Joy said, smirking. "So, you're saying you're qualified to tell people how to make love last after 2 failed attempts?" The laughter this time wasn't warm. It was awkward. Even the audience members shifted in their seats. Steve took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on her. "You know, Joy," he said slowly, "failure is how we learn. Every mistake I made taught me something that made me a better man, a better husband even. That's what the book's about." But Joy pressed on. "Or maybe," she said, tilting her head, "it's about making money off telling people what they want to hear." The tension was instant. You could feel the air change. Whoopi's eyes widened slightly. Sonny Hostin looked uncomfortable. The producers in the control room were whispering into their headsets, realizing this was no longer a light-hearted interview. It was a live minefield. Steve leaned forward now, his deep voice carrying through the studio. "You think I need to sell books to make money, Joy? Come on now. I've been blessed beyond what I ever dreamed. I do this because people ask me for guidance. Because I've lived it. Because I care," but Joy wasn't backing down. "Oh, come on, Steve, you're a comedian. Let's not act like you're a preacher up here saving souls. You're in the entertainment business just like the rest of us." Steve's face went still. The room was silent. "You're right," he said after a long pause. "I am in the entertainment business, but I don't tear people down to entertain." The words hit the studio like a thunderclap. Even Joy blinked. For a moment, she had no comeback. The audience let out a collective murmur, the kind that ripples through a crowd when something real has just been said. But then she laughed, a sharp, defensive laugh. "Oh, don't act like you're a saint, Steve. You've made jokes at people's expense for years." "Yeah," Steve said, nodding, his voice calm but firm. "But I make people laugh to lift them up, not to break them down. There's a difference. The crowd burst into applause. Joy's smile froze. You could see the flicker of irritation cross her face. She glanced toward Whoopi, maybe looking for an opening to change the subject. But Whoopi wisely stayed silent. Look, Steve continued, his tone softening but his words cutting deeper. I came here to talk about hope, about how people can overcome the messes of their lives and still build something beautiful. But if all you want to do is drag up the past and make fun of folks for trying, that's not conversation. That's cruelty. Another wave of applause. Joy shifted in her seat, crossing her arms. You sound a little sensitive, Steve. Can't take a little tough questioning? Steve laughed, but it wasn't his usual hearty laugh. It was quieter, almost sad. Joy, I've faced tougher things than a few questions on TV. But I thought this was a show about women empowering people, not tearing them down. The room went silent again. For the first time all morning, Joy didn't have a snappy reply. Steve stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket. I appreciate the invite, he said. But I think we done here. Wait, what? Joy said, startled. Steve turned to the audience, gave a polite wave, and smiled faintly. Y'all have a blessed day. And remember, don't let anybody turn your purpose into their punchline. He walked off the stage to thunderous applause, leaving Joy sitting frozen, her expression a mix of disbelief and frustration. The producers were scrambling. The camera's still rolling. Whoopi leaned forward and said quietly, We'll be right back. But the truth was, everyone in that studio knew nothing would be the same after that break. Because what the world had just witnessed wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. It was a masterclass in dignity, composure, and standing tall in the face of provocation. Steve Harvey didn't just walk off the view that day. He walked away with his integrity fully intact. And as clips of the moment spread like wildfire across the internet, one thing became clear. In a world that often rewards outrage over authenticity, Steve Harvey had just reminded everyone what real class looks like. The studio lights burned bright. The audience, hundreds of eager daytime TV fans, leaned forward in their seats, expecting laughter, charm, and the usual Steve Harvey humor that filled homes across America. But what unfolded next was anything but routine. Steve Harvey had come to the View that morning to promote his new relationship book, a heartfelt project about love, growth, and learning from one's mistakes. But across the table sat Joy Behar, ready not for a friendly chat but a confrontation. Steve began calm and confident as always, saying, I don't hide my past. I'm open about my journey because that's what makes my advice real. I'm not some theoretical relationship guru sitting in an ivory tower. I'm a man who's lived through the ups and downs of love and marriage, and I use those experiences to help people avoid the same pitfalls. The audience nodded. It was the kind of honest, grounded message they'd come to expect from Steve, real talk wrapped in humility. But Joy wasn't buying it. She leaned back in her chair, her tone dripping with sarcasm. But doesn't that make you more of a cautionary tale than an advice giver? She said, smirking. I mean, if I wanted relationship advice, I'd probably go to someone who got it right the first time, not someone who kept trying until something stuck. The crowd gave an uneasy chuckle. It wasn't the lighthearted joke they were used to. The tension in the studio thickened like fog. Steve didn't immediately respond. He took a slow breath, his eyes fixed on Joy. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but carried steel underneath. Joy, I think what you're doing right now is exactly the kind of negativity that destroys relationships. You're taking someone's honesty and vulnerability and trying to use it as a weapon against them. That's not journalism. That's just mean-spirited. The silence was heavy. Even Whoopi shifted in her seat. Joy's eyes flashed with a glint of satisfaction, like she'd found exactly the reaction she wanted. She let out a short laugh, but there was no warmth in it. Mean-spirited? Steve, I'm asking legitimate questions that our viewers deserve answers to. You've built an empire telling people how to live their lives. You charge people money for advice. You write books, give seminars. I think it's fair to examine your qualifications, don't you? Steve's smile was gone now. His hands clasped tightly in his lap, his knuckles white. He was still composed, but the strain was visible. My qualifications, he said, voice steady but low, are my life experiences, both the successes and the failures. Every heartbreak, every mistake, every lesson I learned the hard way, that's what makes me qualified. But what I'm hearing from you isn't curiosity, Joy. What I'm hearing is someone who takes pleasure in tearing people down. Joy waved a dismissive hand. Oh, please. Don't try to make me the villain here just because I'm asking you tough questions. This is what we do on this show, Steve. We don't sit here and let guests deliver rehearsed talking points. Whoopi, sensing things were spiraling, jumped in quickly. Maybe we can talk about Steve's new comedy special, she said, forcing a light laugh. I heard it's hilarious. But Joy cut her off. No, Whoopi, I think this is important. Steve has built a brand on giving people advice. I think it's fair to ask whether people should be taking life lessons from someone who clearly struggled to make love work himself. The words hit the air like a slap. Even some audience members groaned audibly. Steve's jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly, his deep voice calm but sharp. Joy, let me ask you something. How many relationships have you been in? How many times have you given advice to friends about their love lives? Because if we're judging people's qualifications based on perfection, nobody in this room qualifies for anything. The audience broke into applause. Joy's expression faltered, for a second, then hardened again. This isn't about me, she snapped quickly. I'm not the one selling relationship advice to millions of people. No, Steve said, his tone rising ever so slightly. You're the one trying to destroy someone's reputation on national television. And for what, ratings? A viral clip? What's the point of this, Joy? What are you trying to accomplish here? The room went dead silent. Whoopi looked between them nervously, unsure whether to step in or let the moment play out. The audience sat frozen. You could hear the hum of the cameras and the soft rustle of someone shifting in their chair. Joy's voice came out sharper now, laced with anger. I'm trying to get real answers, Steve. You can't build a whole image around being the relationship guy and expect nobody to question it. Steve nodded slowly, his eyes locked on hers. That's fair, he said quietly. But there's a way to question people without humiliating them. There's a way to have a real conversation without turning it into an ambush. He paused, his voice deepening with emotion. You know what the difference is between asking questions and being cruel? Intent. When you care about understanding, it shows. When you care about hurting, that shows too. The words landed with the kind of gravity that only truth carries. For a moment, Joy didn't respond. She just stared back, lips pressed together, her confidence visibly wavering. Steve leaned back, exhaled, and said softly, I came here today to make people laugh, to bring a little hope, a little joy, not to sit here defending my humanity. His words hung in the air. You could hear sniffles from a few audience members. The energy had completely shifted, from confrontation to reflection. Whoopi finally spoke, her voice gentle. Maybe that's a message we all need to hear. But Joy, unwilling to let go, muttered under her breath, You're being too sensitive, Steve. Steve turned to her, eyes calm but cutting. No, Joy, I'm being human. And that's something this world and sometimes this show forgets about. The audience erupted into applause. A standing ovation rippled through the studio. Joy looked taken aback, caught between frustration and disbelief. Steve stood, buttoned his jacket, and gave a polite nod to Whoopi and the others. I think we're done here, he said softly. I've got nothing but love for this show, but I don't participate in conversations that tear people down. With that, he walked off the stage, the cameras capturing every step. The applause followed him out of the studio, echoing long after the doors closed behind him. Joy sat silently, her face flushed. Whoopi turned to the camera, her voice calm but somber. We'll be right back. But everyone in that room knew things would not be the same after the break. Because that day, Steve Harvey didn't just defend his name. He defended the idea that vulnerability isn't weakness and it's courage. That honesty isn't something to weaponize, it's something to honor. And in a world where controversy often overshadows compassion, Steve Harvey reminded everyone watching what real strength looks like. Grace under fire. The energy in the studio had shifted from awkward tension to something explosive, something that no one in the room was ready for. The co-hosts, who had started the segment smiling and nodding, were now exchanging panicked looks. You could see them glancing toward the producers off camera, silently begging for someone to step in and stop the meltdown that was rapidly unfolding live on television. The audience, once buzzing with excitement to see the charismatic Family Feud host, was now restless. Some faces were angry, others anxious, but all were locked in disbelief at what they were witnessing. Joy Behar leaned forward, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "What I'm trying to accomplish, Steve," she said, her tone sharp and cold, "is honest journalism. Something that's clearly in short supply these days when it comes to celebrity interviews. Everyone wants to come on these shows and get softball questions and fake smiles. I'm not here to blow sunshine." Steve blinked, his brows furrowing in disbelief. "Honest journalism?" he repeated slowly, his deep voice filled with a mix of shock and disappointment. "Is that what you call this, Joy? Because what this looks like to me is someone who's bitter about something, taking their frustrations out on a guest who came here in good faith to have a conversation." The word bitter landed like a bomb in the studio. The crowd gasped. Even Whoopi's hand went up instinctively, as if trying to signal for calm before the explosion. Joy's face turned crimson. Her voice dropped to a dangerously low register. "Did you just call me bitter?" Steve realized instantly that the line had been crossed. But instead of retreating, he decided to stand his ground. His voice remained even, but the intensity behind his eyes was unmistakable. "If the shoe fits, Joy," he said quietly. "You've been attacking me from the moment I sat down. And for what? Because I've been married more than once? Because I've made mistakes in my personal life? What's really going on here?" Joy's composure snapped like glass under pressure. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with fury. "You want to know what's going on here, Steve?" she shouted. "I'll tell you what's going on. I'm tired of men like you profiting off women's insecurities while your own lives are a mess. You write these books, act like a lady, think like a man. All this nonsense that tells women how to contort themselves into some formula to land a husband. It's garbage. It's outdated. And frankly, it's insulting." The studio fell into stunned silence. Steve took a slow breath. His voice rose, firm, commanding, but still measured. "Now wait just a minute. Don't you dare misrepresent what I do. I help people, Joy. I help families. I give people hope. I make them laugh, and yes, sometimes I give advice based on lessons I learned the hard way. That's called growth. That's called experience." He took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "So let me ask you something. What do you do, Joy? What's your contribution to the world besides sitting here tearing people down?" The audience erupted. Half the room broke into thunderous applause for Steve, while the other half booed in disbelief. The co-hosts were frozen, trying to maintain their smiles as producers frantically gestured from behind the cameras, waving their hands for someone, anyone, to cut to commercial, but it was too late. Joy stood up abruptly, her chair screeching across the floor. Her voice cracked as she shouted, "My contribution? You want to know what my contribution is? It's calling out phonies like you, men who prey on people's vulnerabilities for profit. You're nothing but a snake oil salesman in a nice suit, Steve Harvey." The audience gasped again, the words echoing like a slap. Steve stood up too, taller, steadier, his presence commanding the entire room. He looked down at Joy, his expression calm but filled with disappointment. "And you," he said slowly, "are nothing but a bitter woman who can't stand to see other people succeed. This has nothing to do with journalism, Joy. This is about you. Whatever's eating at you when you brought it here today. Personal issues." Joy screamed, her voice breaking. "How dare you psychoanalyze me on my own show?" Steve laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Your show? Last I checked, this was called The View, not the Joy Behar Show. But I guess that's part of the problem, isn't it? You think everything revolves around you, your opinions, your grudges, your bitterness." The audience broke into a mix of cheers and gasps. Whoopi jumped in, desperate to regain control. Okay, let's everybody just take a breath here." But Joy wasn't done. She jabbed a finger toward Steve, her voice trembling with fury. "You want to talk about personal issues, Steve? Fine, let's talk about you. Let's talk about how you treat your staff. Let's talk about what really goes on behind the scenes of your shows. I've heard stories about how the man who preaches respect and kindness doesn't exactly practice what he preaches when the cameras stop rolling." The room fell completely silent. Even Whoopi froze. The audience shifted, stunned, realizing that the interview had now gone from uncomfortable to explosive. Steve took a long, slow breath, visibly fighting to keep his composure. His voice, when it finally came, was deep and controlled. "You can say whatever you want about me, Joy, but when you start dragging the people who work with me, the people who depend on me, that's when you cross the line." He stepped forward slightly, not in anger, but in quiet strength. I may not be perfect. I've made mistakes, but I treat my people like family. You don't have to like me, but don't you dare disrespect the people who give their time and energy to build something good. The audience erupted again, louder this time, overwhelmingly on his side. Applause thundered through the studio. Some even stood to their feet. Joy looked around, flustered, her confidence unraveling. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Steve looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "You wanted honesty? There it is. Not every question deserves an answer. Not every wound deserves to be reopened. But every person deserves respect, even on your stage." He turned to Whoopi, gave a polite nod, and straightened his suit. "I think I've said enough. Thank you for your time." Then, to a roaring standing ovation, Steve Harvey walked off the stage, leaving behind a visibly shaken Joy Behar, a stunned panel, and a production team scrambling to cut to commercial. The cameras caught one final shot, Joy sitting in her chair, staring into the distance as Whoopi quietly said, "We'll be right back." But everyone watching at home knew nothing about the view would ever be the same after that day. Because Steve Harvey didn't just win an argument. He reclaimed his dignity. He reminded millions of viewers that grace under fire is the strongest form of power, and that sometimes walking away isn't weakness. It's wisdom.